Every family has secrets, but in this house, those secrets were deadly. It began with a cry for help, a desperate call that shattered the silence of the night. A young woman was found lifeless, strangled in her own home. On the surface, the family appeared perfect. A respected businessman, a devoted wife, a bright young student with her whole future ahead of her. But behind closed doors, betrayal had already taken root. What could drive a husband to murder his wife's sister, the very woman his family had welcomed into their home? Why would he risk his reputation, his empire, his freedom? And how did an innocent wife, already torn apart by betrayal, become the prime suspect in her own sister's death? This is not just a story about murder. It is a story of lies, manipulation, and obsession. It is about how far someone will go to protect their darkest secrets. And at the center of it all, a single text message: "I'm 6 weeks pregnant." Over the next hour, we will uncover the rise of a man who seemed to have it all. The forbidden affair that destroyed trust, the brutal murder that shocked a community, and the chilling twist that revealed a killer hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Crimevouth, where the darkest truths are revealed. To our incredible viewers and loyal subscribers, thank you for standing by us. Your support means everything. Stay with us as we bring you daily updates on the most chilling and shocking true crime stories you can't look away from. And remember, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Dearborn, Michigan, home to the largest Arab-American community in the United States. Tree-lined streets filled with beautiful homes, successful businesses, and families who've built the American dream from nothing. It's a place where reputation means everything, where community ties run deep, and where respect is earned through hard work, family values, and giving back. In this close-knit world, few families commanded more respect than the Al-Hassans. Karim Al-Hassan wasn't born into wealth, far from it. He arrived in Detroit in 1989 as an 8-year-old boy, clutching his mother's hand as they stepped off a plane from Casablanca, Morocco. His father, Hassan, had scraped together every dollar the family owned to bring them to America, chasing the promise of opportunity that seemed impossible back home. The early years were brutal. Hassan worked 3 jobs: cleaning office buildings at night, washing dishes at a Lebanese restaurant during the day, and doing construction work on weekends. Karim's mother, Fatima, took in sewing and cleaned houses for wealthy families in Birmingham. They lived in a cramped apartment above a convenience store, 5 people sharing 2 bedrooms, surviving on rice, beans, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow would be better than today. When Karim was 16, everything changed. Hassan suffered a massive heart attack while working a construction job, collapsing on the scaffold of a building he was helping to frame. He died before the ambulance arrived, leaving behind a widow, 4 children, and exactly $847 in a savings account that had taken 7 years to accumulate. That night, as his mother sobbed in the kitchen and his younger siblings asked when their father was coming home, Karim made a promise to himself. He would never be poor again. He would never watch his family struggle. And he would do whatever it took to build the kind of life his father had dreamed of, but never lived to see. By age 25, Karim had already purchased his first rental property, a duplex in a rough neighborhood that he bought for $7,000 at a tax auction. He spent nights and weekends fixing it up himself, learning plumbing, electrical work, and carpentry through YouTube videos and sheer determination. Within 2 years, he had renovated the property and was collecting enough rent to buy a second building. The pattern continued: buy distressed properties, renovate them personally, rent them out, use the income to buy more buildings. By 2010, at age 29, Karim owned 12 rental properties across 3 cities. By 2015, he had expanded into commercial real estate, purchasing small shopping centers and office buildings. By 2020, his portfolio included 47 properties worth over $15 million. But success in business was only part of Karim's carefully constructed image. He became a pillar of the Dearborn Islamic Center, donating thousands of dollars annually and sponsoring youth programs for immigrant families. He served on the board of the Arab American Chamber of Commerce, mentored young entrepreneurs, and gave motivational speeches about achieving the American dream through hard work and faith. When local news stations needed an expert to discuss economic development in the Arab American community, they called Karim Al-Hassan. When politicians visited Dearborn, Karim was often seated at the head table during welcome dinners. He drove a black BMW, wore tailored suits, and lived in a sprawling colonial home with marble floors and a 3-car garage. To everyone who knew him, Karim Al-Hassan represented everything admirable about immigrant success in America. He was living proof that with enough determination, anyone could build something meaningful from nothing. But the most important piece of Karim's perfect image was his marriage to Aisha Benjaloun. Aisha was 26 when she first met Karim at a community fundraiser in 2008. She had arrived in Michigan 2 years earlier, fresh from completing a degree in social work at Mohammed V University in Rabat. Unlike Karim, who had spent his childhood in America, Aisha was still adjusting to life in a new country, still learning the subtle differences between Moroccan and American culture, still finding her place in a community that straddled 2 worlds. She was elegant in a way that drew attention without trying to. Tall and graceful, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her, Aisha had the kind of natural beauty that photographs couldn't quite capture. But more than her appearance, people were drawn to her warmth. She had an ability to make anyone feel heard, valued, and understood, a skill that made her exceptionally good at her work with refugee families at the Islamic Center. When Karim first approached her at that fundraiser, Aisha wasn't particularly impressed. She had met plenty of successful men who used their wealth as a conversation starter, and she was more interested in discussing the literacy program she was developing for immigrant women than hearing about real estate investments. But Karim was persistent without being aggressive. He showed up at the Islamic Center the following week, volunteering to help serve meals at the weekly community dinner. He asked thoughtful questions about her work with refugee families and listened carefully to her answers. When he offered to donate money to expand the literacy program, he did it quietly, without fanfare, insisting that his name not be mentioned in any publicity. Their courtship followed traditional patterns that respected both families' expectations while allowing them to genuinely get to know each other. Karim visited the modest apartment Aisha shared with 2 other young women, bringing flowers for all 3 and always behaving with perfect propriety. He invited her to family dinners, where his mother cooked elaborate meals and his younger sisters peppered her with questions about life in Morocco. Within 8 months, they were engaged. The wedding took place in August 2009, a grand celebration at the Dearborn Islamic Center with over 300 guests. Photos from that day show a radiant couple surrounded by beaming families, a picture-perfect beginning to what everyone assumed would be a picture-perfect marriage. For the first few years, it seemed like their assumptions were correct. Karim and Aisha moved into their beautiful home on Maple Street, one of the most prestigious addresses in Dearborn. Aisha continued her work with refugee families while Karim's business empire grew. They traveled to Morocco every summer to visit extended family, hosted elaborate dinner parties for community leaders, and seemed to embody everything their parents had hoped for when they dreamed of their children's futures in America. But there was one shadow hanging over their otherwise perfect life. Despite trying for over a decade, Aisha had been unable to get pregnant. The miscarriages started in 2011, 3 in the first 2 years of marriage, each one devastating Aisha more than the last. Doctors couldn't find any medical reason for the losses. Sometimes these things just happen, they said. Keep trying. Stay hopeful. It will happen when it's meant to happen. By 2018, after 7 years of monthly disappointments, invasive fertility treatments, and the well-meaning but painful questions from family members about when they would start having children, the strain was beginning to show. Karim threw himself deeper into his work, often staying at the office until 9 or 10 at night. Aisha volunteered for more programs at the Islamic Center, pouring her maternal instincts into helping other people's children. They still appeared happy in public, still hosted dinner parties and attended community events, still posted smiling photos on social media from their annual trips to Morocco. But privately, they were slowly becoming strangers, living in the same house, each dealing with their disappointment in their own way, neither quite knowing how to bridge the growing distance between them. Which brings us to the arrival of Iqra Benjaloun in September 2022. Iqra was everything Aisha might have been if she had grown up in America. At 22, she possessed a confidence and ambition that impressed everyone she met. She spoke perfect English with just a hint of a Moroccan accent that made her voice distinctive without hindering communication. She was studying architecture at the University of Michigan, earning grades that put her in the top 5% of her class while working part-time at a prestigious design firm in downtown Detroit. But Iqra wasn't just academically gifted. She had inherited the same natural elegance that made Aisha so striking, combined with a youthful energy that lit up every room she entered. She was funny, intelligent, and possessed an infectious laugh that made even serious conversations feel lighter. The age difference between the sisters was significant. Aisha was 16 when Iqra was born, but it had always made their relationship more maternal than sisterly. When their parents died in a car accident in 2019, Aisha didn't hesitate to become Iqra's legal guardian, helping her navigate the immigration process to come to America and pursue her education. For Aisha, having Iqra in the house was like being given a second chance at motherhood. She helped her sister with homework, took her shopping for American clothes, taught her to drive, and celebrated every academic achievement as if it were her own. For the first time in years, the Al-Hassan home felt truly alive. For Karim, Iqra's arrival was complicated. He told himself he was just being welcoming when he offered to help Iqra with her career networking. After all, he knew people in the construction and development industry who might offer her internships or job opportunities after graduation. It made sense for him to introduce her to potential mentors. He told himself he was just being a good brother-in-law when he started paying special attention to her stories about university life, her dreams of becoming an architect, her plans for the future. Aisha was often busy with her refugee work in the evenings, and it was natural for him to spend time getting to know his wife's sister. He told himself he was just being helpful when he offered to drive Iqra to and from campus when her car was being repaired, when he suggested they grab coffee to discuss her career plans, when he started texting her during the day to check how her classes were going. But deep down, Karim knew he was lying to himself. Iqra represented everything he felt was missing from his life with Aisha. She was young, vibrant, full of possibilities. She looked at him with admiration rather than the quiet disappointment that had crept into Aisha's eyes over the years. She laughed at his jokes, asked for his advice, and made him feel like the successful, powerful man he had worked so hard to become. By December 2022, 3 months after Iqra had moved in, Karim's interest had shifted from protective to predatory. He found himself making excuses to be alone with her. He started working from home more often, timing his breaks to coincide with when she returned from classes. He began offering to help with her assignments, sitting closer to her than necessary as they looked at architectural drawings spread across the kitchen table. Iqra, focused on her studies and grateful for her sister's generosity, initially misread Karim's attention as familial kindness. She appreciated having a successful mentor who understood the challenges of building a life in America. She valued his business advice and career guidance. She was flattered that such an accomplished man took interest in her goals and ambitions. But sometime in January 2023, the nature of Karim's attention became impossible to ignore. It started with compliments that went beyond what was appropriate for a brother-in-law to say to his wife's sister. Comments about how beautiful she looked, how smart she was, how lucky any man would be to have her attention. Then came the casual touches, a hand on her shoulder that lingered too long, fingers brushing against hers when he handed her a cup of coffee, standing closer than necessary when they talked. Iqra tried to convince herself she was imagining things. Karim was her sister's husband, a respected member of the community, a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and support. Surely she was misinterpreting his behavior, reading romantic interest into actions that were simply friendly. But the afternoon in late January, when Karim asked her to meet him at a coffee shop near campus to discuss her summer internship opportunities, Iqra could no longer pretend she didn't understand what was happening. They sat in a corner booth, ostensibly reviewing her portfolio and discussing potential employers. But Karim's attention wasn't on her drawings. He was studying her face, watching her mouth as she spoke, looking at her in a way that made her uncomfortable in a manner she couldn't quite articulate. "You know," he said finally, "you're extraordinary, Ikra. Not just beautiful, though you certainly are that, but intelligent, ambitious, full of life. Sometimes I watch you and think about all the possibilities ahead of you, all the things you're going to accomplish." "Thank you," she replied, not sure how else to respond to such intensity. "Aisha is lucky to have you as a sister," he continued, "but I wonder sometimes if she really understands who you are, what you're capable of. She sees you as the little sister she needs to protect. I see you as the remarkable woman you've become." The conversation continued for another hour, with Karim gradually becoming more personal in his observations, more intimate in his tone. He talked about his own dreams, his disappointments, the loneliness he felt despite his success. He spoke about his marriage in vague terms that suggested dissatisfaction without explicitly criticizing Aisha. By the time they left the coffee shop, Ikra felt confused and unsettled. She cared about Karim. He had been nothing but generous and supportive since she arrived in America. She respected his accomplishments and valued his guidance, but the conversation had felt less like career mentoring and more like something else. That night, she lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. Was she overreacting to innocent comments? Was Karim just being friendly, and she was the one whose thoughts had wandered into inappropriate territory? Or was something genuinely wrong happening that she needed to address? The answer came 3 days later, when her phone buzzed with a text message from Karim while she was sitting in her structural engineering class. "I can't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. You're an incredible woman, Ikra. I hope you know that." She stared at the message for a full minute, her heart racing. This was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This was her sister's husband, sending her text messages that had nothing to do with career advice or family support. She didn't respond to the text, but she didn't delete it either. Over the following weeks, the messages continued, never anything explicitly romantic or sexual, but always personal, always focused on her, always sent when Aisha was at work or busy with community activities. "How did your presentation go today? I've been thinking about you. You looked beautiful at dinner last night. That color is perfect on you. I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about what you said about following your dreams, no matter what others expect of you." Each message felt like a small betrayal of her sister's trust, but also like a secret she couldn't quite bring herself to expose. What would she say? That Karim was being too friendly? That he was paying her too many compliments? That he was texting her more often than seemed appropriate? Aisha adored her husband. Despite whatever private struggles they might be having with starting a family, she spoke about him with genuine love and pride. She bragged about his business success, his community involvement, his generosity to their extended family back in Morocco. She trusted him completely. How could Ikra destroy that trust based on text messages that never explicitly crossed any lines? The situation became more complicated in February when Karim started suggesting they meet for coffee more regularly to discuss her career development. These meetings always took place when Aisha was busy, always at locations across town from their neighborhood, always with explanations that made perfect sense but felt increasingly like deceptions. During these coffee dates, Karim's behavior became progressively more intimate. He would lean across the table when she spoke, his face inches from hers. He would touch her hand when making a point, his fingers intertwining with hers for just a moment longer than necessary. He would compliment not just her intelligence but her beauty, not just her potential but her effect on him personally. "You make me feel young again," he told her one afternoon in early March. "Like anything is possible. I had forgotten what it felt like to be excited about the future until you came into our lives." "Karim," she said carefully, "I think maybe we should—" "I know this is complicated," he interrupted. "I know you're Aisha's sister, and I know I'm married. But some connections transcend conventional boundaries. Some feelings are too powerful to ignore." That night, Ikra made a decision. She was going to tell Aisha everything. The inappropriate text messages, the coffee meetings, the increasingly personal conversations. She was going to explain that while nothing physical had happened, Karim's behavior was making her uncomfortable and needed to stop. But when she got home, she found Aisha sitting at the kitchen table, crying over a negative pregnancy test, the latest in a series of monthly disappointments that had stretched across 14 years of marriage. Her sister looked so fragile, so heartbroken, so completely devastated by another month of failed hopes. Iqra sat down beside her, held her hand and listened as Aisha poured out her frustration, her sadness, her growing fear that she would never become a mother. They talked until nearly midnight, and by the end of the conversation, Iqra couldn't bring herself to add another burden to her sister's already breaking heart. She would handle the situation with Karim herself. She would set clear boundaries, make it obvious that his attention was unwanted, and find a way to redirect their relationship back to appropriate family interactions. She had no idea that her decision to protect her sister's feelings would lead to consequences beyond anything she could imagine. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Trust me, what happens next will shock you even more than what you've already heard. The transformation from inappropriate attention to full-blown affair happened faster than Iqra could have predicted or prepared for. Looking back, she would recognize the signs of emotional manipulation that she missed at the time, but in the moment, she felt like she was drowning in confusion, guilt, and feelings she didn't want to acknowledge. The turning point came on March 3, 2023, exactly 12 days before everything would fall apart. Aisha had left that morning for a 3-day conference in Chicago, a gathering of social workers from across the Midwest who specialized in refugee services. She had been looking forward to the conference for months, excited to learn about new programs and network with colleagues who shared her passion for helping immigrant families. Karim offered to drive her to the airport, and Iqra remembered watching them from the living room window as they loaded Aisha's suitcase into his BMW. Her sister looked genuinely happy for the first time in weeks, animated as she talked about the presentations she planned to attend and the people she hoped to meet. After they left for the airport, Iqra tried to focus on her final project for her advanced structural design course, a complex assignment that required her to design a 20-story mixed-use building with specific requirements for earthquake resistance and energy efficiency. She spread her drawings across the dining room table and worked steadily through the afternoon, grateful for the quiet house and the opportunity to concentrate without distractions. Karim returned from the airport around 3 o'clock and immediately sought her out, finding her surrounded by architectural drawings and engineering calculations. "How's the project coming along?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her without being invited. "It's challenging," she admitted. "I'm struggling with the load distribution in the upper floors. The weight calculations aren't working out the way I expected." Without being asked, Karim began examining her drawings, asking intelligent questions about her design choices and offering suggestions based on his experience with commercial construction projects. Despite her growing discomfort with his personal attention, Iqra had to admit that his professional insights were genuinely helpful. They worked together for over an hour, their heads bent close over the technical drawings as Karim helped her identify solutions to the structural problems she had been wrestling with all week. For a brief period, their interaction felt professional, appropriate, and genuinely beneficial to her education. But as the afternoon stretched into evening, the dynamic began to shift. "You know," Karim said as they took a break from the technical work, "I never had the opportunity to pursue higher education when I was your age. I was too busy working, trying to keep my family from losing everything after my father died." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Iqra replied, genuinely sympathetic to the struggles he had overcome. "It was. But seeing you pursue your dreams, watching you develop your talents, it makes me wonder what my life might have been like if I had been able to follow my own interests instead of just focusing on survival." The conversation continued in this vein for another hour, with Karim sharing more about his personal history than he had ever revealed before. He talked about the loneliness of being the family provider at such a young age, the pressure of always having to appear strong and successful, the sacrifices he had made to build his current life. Sometimes I feel like I built a beautiful cage for myself, he said finally. Everything looks perfect from the outside, but inside I feel trapped by expectations, by responsibilities, by the image I've created. Iqra found herself genuinely moved by his vulnerability. This wasn't the confident, successful businessman she saw at family gatherings and community events. This was a man wrestling with regret, isolation, and the weight of always having to be perfect. "I'm sure Aisha understands those pressures," she offered. "She talks about how proud she is of everything you've accomplished." "Aisha sees what she wants to see," Karim replied, his voice taking on a note of frustration that surprised Iqra. "She loves the idea of being married to a successful man, but she doesn't really know who I am underneath all the achievements. Sometimes I think she married my reputation rather than me." The criticism of her sister made Iqra uncomfortable, but before she could respond, Karim continued, "You're different, Iqra. When you look at me, I feel like you see the real person, not just the image. When we talk, I feel understood in a way I haven't experienced in years." The intensity in his voice was unmistakable now, and Iqra realized that they had crossed into dangerous territory. She stood up from the table, intending to create physical distance and redirect the conversation. "Karim, I think maybe we should—" But he stood up too, moving closer to her instead of respecting her attempt to step away. "Don't run away from this," he said softly. "I know you feel it too. This connection between us, this understanding, it's not something that happens often in life." "You're married to my sister," she said, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "Marriage doesn't automatically create understanding," he replied. "It doesn't guarantee compatibility or emotional connection. Sometimes the person who truly knows you is someone you never expected to find." Before she could respond, he reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart race, despite her confusion. "You're so beautiful, Iqra, so intelligent, so full of life. Being around you makes me remember what it feels like to be hopeful about the future." She should have stepped away, should have reminded him about his marriage, about her loyalty to Aisha, about all the reasons why this moment was wrong. Instead, she found herself frozen, caught between attraction she didn't want to acknowledge and guilt she couldn't escape. When he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, she didn't pull away. When the kiss deepened and became more passionate, she found herself responding despite every rational thought in her head telling her to stop. The affair began that night, in the house where her sister lived, while Aisha was 800 miles away, learning how to better serve refugee families who depended on her compassion and dedication. Over the following week, while Aisha remained in Chicago for the extended conference she had decided to attend, Karim and Iqra fell into a pattern of stolen intimacy that felt both inevitable and catastrophic. During the day, they maintained the pretense of appropriate family relationships. Karim went to his office as usual, attending meetings and managing his properties. Iqra attended classes and worked on her assignments. They exchanged polite conversation during dinner and kept their interactions properly distant whenever other people were present. But at night, after the house grew quiet and the neighbors' lights went out, they came together with a passion that was fueled as much by guilt as by attraction. Karim was an experienced manipulator, though Iqra didn't recognize his tactics at the time. He alternated between overwhelming her with attention and affection, then withdrawing and making her question whether she had imagined the connection between them. He told her she was extraordinary, special, different from anyone he had ever known, then expressed doubt about whether their relationship could work, making her more desperate to prove her worthiness of his attention. "This is impossible," he would say after they had spent hours talking and touching in the darkened living room. "I can't ask you to be part of something so complicated. You deserve someone who can give you everything openly, without secrets or complications." "I don't want anyone else," she would reply, meaning it completely in those moments when his withdrawal made her panic at the thought of losing him. "But what kind of future could we have?" he would continue, his voice full of anguish that seemed genuine. "I can't leave Aisha. It would destroy her, and the scandal would ruin everything I've built. But I can't stop wanting you, needing you. You've become essential to me." These conversations continued night after night. with Karim gradually convincing Iqra that their relationship was both impossible and irresistible, something that transcended conventional morality because of its intensity and inevitability. He was careful never to make explicit promises about leaving his wife, but he implied possibilities that kept Iqra hopeful. He talked about someday and if circumstances were different and when the time is right. He painted pictures of a future where they could be together openly, while never committing to concrete steps toward making that future possible. Meanwhile, he gathered information about Iqra's emotional vulnerabilities and used them to deepen his control over her. He learned about her fears of never fitting in completely in America, her anxiety about her career prospects, her guilt over being a financial burden on her sister. Then he positioned himself as the solution to all these concerns. "You don't need to worry about money," he would tell her. "I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed. You'll never be alone in this country as long as I'm here," he would promise. "I understand what it's like to feel caught between two worlds. I'll help you find your place." "Your talent is extraordinary," he would assure her. "With my connections in the construction industry, I can guarantee you'll have opportunities that other graduates could only dream of." By the time Aisha returned from Chicago on March 10th, Iqra was completely emotionally entangled with her brother-in-law. She genuinely believed that what they shared was love rather than manipulation, destiny rather than predatory behavior. She was convinced that Karim's marriage to her sister was a mistake that had trapped him in an unfulfilling relationship, and that she was somehow rescuing him from a life of quiet desperation. The guilt over betraying Aisha was overwhelming, but Iqra had convinced herself that her sister would eventually understand and forgive them once she realized how genuinely they cared for each other. She told herself that Aisha deserved to be with someone who loved her completely, and that staying in a marriage where the husband was in love with someone else was ultimately worse than ending the relationship cleanly. She had no idea that Karim had never felt trapped in his marriage, had never planned to leave Aisha, and was already beginning to plan how to end their affair without facing any consequences for starting it. The text message that would change everything was sent on March 12th at 2:47 p.m., while Iqra was sitting in her Advanced Materials and Methods class, trying to focus on a lecture about sustainable building practices. She had been feeling nauseated for 3 days, attributing it to stress and lack of sleep. But when she realized she was over a week late for her period, a horrible possibility occurred to her. During her lunch break, she drove to a pharmacy across town from campus, purchased a pregnancy test, and took it in the bathroom of a McDonald's where nobody would recognize her. 2 pink lines. Unmistakably positive. She sat in her car in the McDonald's parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the plastic test and trying to process what this meant for her life, for her relationship with Karim, for her sister's marriage, for everything. Finally, her hands shaking, she typed out the message that would set in motion the most tragic night of her short life. "Karim, I don't know what to do. I'm 6 weeks pregnant." She hit send before she could change her mind, then drove home in a daze, her entire future suddenly uncertain in ways she had never imagined possible. She had no way of knowing that Karim, reading her message in his downtown office, wasn't thinking about their future together or how to handle this unexpected development responsibly. He was thinking about how to eliminate a problem that threatened to destroy everything he had spent his adult life building, and he was already beginning to form a plan that would solve all his problems permanently. When Karim read Iqra's pregnancy text that Tuesday afternoon, his first emotion wasn't joy, fear, or even disappointment. It was cold, calculating rage at the stupidity of allowing such a complication to develop. He had started the affair with Iqra as a momentary escape from the pressures of his marriage and business, a brief indulgence in the ego boost that came from an attractive young woman's attention. He had never intended for it to become serious, never planned for it to threaten his carefully constructed life, never imagined that such a temporary diversion could create permanent consequences. A pregnancy changed everything. A pregnancy meant evidence that couldn't be hidden or denied. A pregnancy meant a child who would grow up asking questions about their father. A pregnancy meant potential scandal, community judgment, business reputation destroyed, marriage ended, respect lost forever. Unless, of course, The pregnancy could be handled quietly and privately. Karim's response to Iqra's text was carefully measured. "We need to talk tonight. Don't say anything to anyone until we've had a chance to discuss this properly." That evening, after Aisha had gone to bed with a headache, Karim found Iqra sitting on the back porch, staring out at the darkened yard with an expression of overwhelmed confusion. "How certain are you?" he asked without preamble. "I took 3 tests," she replied, "all positive. I made a doctor's appointment for tomorrow to confirm, but I'm sure." Karim sat down beside her, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. "This is complicated," he said finally. "I know, but Karim, maybe this is the sign we were waiting for. Maybe this is the push we needed to stop hiding and start building a real future together." The hope in her voice made him want to shake her. How could she be so naive? How could she possibly think that a pregnancy would make their situation better rather than infinitely worse? "Iqra," he said carefully, "you have to understand how impossible that would be. If this comes out, if people learn about our relationship, it won't just affect us. It will destroy your sister. It will ruin both our families. The scandal will make it impossible for either of us to continue living in this community." "But if we explain—" "There is no explanation that makes this acceptable," he interrupted. "You're Aisha's sister. You've been living in our house, accepting our hospitality, our financial support. People will say I took advantage of you. They'll say you betrayed your sister's trust. Neither of us will ever recover from that kind of judgment." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Karim systematically destroying every hopeful scenario Iqra proposed while positioning himself as the voice of reason and responsibility. He explained in detail exactly how the revelation of their affair would affect everyone involved, how Aisha would be humiliated, how their extended families would be scandalized, how Iqra's future career prospects would be destroyed by the stigma. "The only responsible thing to do," he said finally, "is to handle this quietly, privately, before it becomes a problem that destroys everyone we care about." "Handle it how?" Iqra asked, though she already knew what he meant. "There's a clinic in Columbus. Very private, very professional. We could drive there this weekend. It would be over in a few hours and no one would ever have to know any of this happened." The words hit Iqra like a physical blow. She had grown up in a deeply religious family where the sanctity of life was considered absolute. The idea of ending a pregnancy went against everything she had been taught to believe about morality, faith, and responsibility. "I can't do that," she whispered. "Karim, this is our child. How can you ask me to—" "It's not a child yet," he said firmly. "It's a potential problem that will ruin multiple lives if we don't handle it responsibly. Think about Aisha. Think about what this revelation would do to her. She's already struggling with not being able to have children of her own. How do you think she'll feel when she learns that her sister got pregnant by her husband?" The manipulation was masterful. Karim was using Iqra's love for her sister, her guilt over the affair, and her religious beliefs against each other, creating an impossible emotional situation where any choice felt like a betrayal of her values. "I need time to think," she said finally. "We don't have time," Karim replied. "Every day we wait makes this more complicated. If you really care about protecting Aisha, if you really want to minimize the damage we've caused, you'll let me arrange the appointment for this weekend." But Iqra was stronger than he had anticipated. Despite his psychological pressure, despite her own confusion and fear, she couldn't bring herself to agree to something that violated her deepest beliefs. "I won't do it," she said quietly. "I can't. If that means we have to find another way to handle this situation, then that's what we'll do. But I won't end this pregnancy." That night, lying awake in his bed next to his sleeping wife, Karim realized that Iqra's refusal had created an impossible situation. She was naive enough to believe that they could somehow make their relationship work publicly. She was religious enough to refuse the simple solution that would eliminate all his problems. And she was young enough to think that love could overcome the practical realities of scandal, social ostracism, and destroyed reputations. More dangerously, she was emotional enough to confess everything to Aisha if he pushed too hard or if she felt cornered. For the first time since the affair began, Karim started thinking seriously about permanent solutions to temporary problems. The breaking point came on March 14th, and it was Aisha who triggered it. Though she had no idea what forces she was setting in motion, she had been noticing small changes in the household dynamic since her return from Chicago. Nothing dramatic, nothing she could articulate clearly, but subtle shifts in the way Karim and Ikra interacted. They seemed more aware of each other, more careful about how they spoke and moved when all three of them were in the same room. Aisha attributed the awkwardness to the stress both of them were under, Karim with his business pressures, Ikra with her final semester coursework and thesis project. But on Tuesday night, when she had gone to bed early with a headache and later gotten up to get a glass of water, she had noticed them sitting close together on the back porch, their heads bent in what appeared to be an intimate conversation. The sight bothered her in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was something about their body language, their obvious comfort with each other that felt different, more personal than she would have expected between a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Wednesday morning, Karim left early for a property inspection in Ann Arbor, and Aisha found herself alone with Ikra for the first time in several days. Her sister was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched bowl of cereal and looking pale and distracted. "Are you feeling all right?" Aisha asked. "You look like you haven't been sleeping well." "I'm fine," Ikra replied quickly. "Just stressed about finishing my thesis." But as Aisha watched her sister throughout the morning, she noticed other things that didn't seem related to academic stress. Ikra barely touched her breakfast, claiming she wasn't hungry. She made excuses to avoid drinking the coffee Aisha offered her. She seemed jumpy and emotional, tearing up during a television commercial that wasn't particularly sad. By Thursday evening, Aisha's maternal instincts were fully activated. She had spent years working with refugee families, helping women navigate difficult pregnancies and family situations. She recognized the signs of early pregnancy, even when the woman experiencing them didn't realize what was happening to her body. The possibility that occurred to her was devastating to contemplate, but it would explain so much. Ikra's recent emotional volatility, her changed eating habits, her obvious anxiety and distraction. It would also explain the strange tension she had been sensing between Ikra and Karim. That night, after Karim had gone to his home office to work on financial reports, Aisha knocked softly on the door of the guest bedroom where Ikra was supposedly studying. "Can we talk?" she asked gently. Ikra looked up from her textbook with obvious reluctance. "Sure, what about?" Aisha sat down on the edge of the bed, studying her sister's face with the careful attention she had learned to apply when working with clients who were hiding dangerous secrets. "Ikra, I want you to know that you can tell me anything. No matter what's happening, no matter how complicated or difficult it might seem, I'm here to help you figure it out." "I don't know what you mean," Ikra replied, but her voice was shaky. "Are you pregnant?" Aisha asked directly. The question hit its target with devastating accuracy. Ikra's face went white, her eyes filled with tears, and her hands began to tremble visibly. "How did you—" she started to ask, then stopped herself. "I've worked with enough pregnant women to recognize the signs," Aisha said softly. "The question is, who's the father?" The silence stretched between them for nearly a minute. Ikra opened her mouth several times as if to speak, then closed it again. She looked terrified, guilty, and utterly lost. "Ikra," Aisha said finally, "whatever happened, whoever this man is, we can figure out how to handle it. But I need you to tell me the truth." "You'll hate me," Ikra whispered. "I could never hate you. You're my sister. You're the most important person in the world to me." The kindness in Aisha's voice was what finally broke Ikra's resolve to keep the secret. Between sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul, she told her sister everything. The inappropriate attention that had started in January, the coffee meetings and private conversations, the night Aisha was in Chicago when everything changed, the weeks of secret intimacy and stolen moments, the pregnancy test, Karim's demand that she end the pregnancy, her refusal to do something that violated her beliefs. Aisha listened to the entire confession without interrupting, her face growing progressively more composed as the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. When Ikra finally finished speaking, exhausted by the emotional release of finally telling the truth, Aisha was completely silent for several minutes. "I'm so sorry," Ikra finally whispered. "Aisha, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I tried to stop it before it went too far, but he made me feel like we had this special connection, like he really understood me in a way no one else ever had." "He manipulated you," Aisha said quietly. "You were vulnerable, living in a foreign country, dependent on our kindness, and he used that vulnerability to take advantage of you." "But I let it happen," Ikra insisted. "I could have said no. I could have told you immediately when he first started paying inappropriate attention to me. Instead, I let myself get caught up in feeling special, feeling desired. This is my fault too." Aisha looked at her sister, this young woman she had raised, protected and loved like a daughter, and felt her heart breaking in ways she hadn't known were possible. The betrayal by her husband was devastating, but the knowledge that Ikra had been carrying this burden alone, manipulated and controlled by a man who should have protected her, was almost unbearable. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Karim says if this comes out, it will destroy everyone. He says the scandal will ruin both our reputations, hurt our families, make it impossible for us to continue living here." "And what do you want to do about the pregnancy?" "I want to keep it," Ikra said immediately. "I know that makes everything more complicated, but I can't end a pregnancy just because it's inconvenient or embarrassing. This child didn't ask to be created in such a terrible situation." Aisha nodded slowly. "Then we'll figure out how to make that work." "What about Karim? What about your marriage?" For the first time since the conversation began, Aisha's composure cracked slightly. She had spent 14 years building a life with a man she thought she knew, a man she had trusted completely, a man who had apparently been capable of betraying her in the most intimate way possible. "I need to think about that," she said honestly. "Right now, my priority is making sure you're safe and supported. Everything else, we'll figure out everything else later." Neither woman realized that Karim had been standing in the hallway outside the guest bedroom door for the last 10 minutes of their conversation, listening to every word and coming to his own conclusions about what needed to happen next. From his perspective, Ikra had just signed both their death warrants. By confessing to Aisha, she had made it impossible for him to contain the situation quietly. By refusing to end the pregnancy, she had created permanent evidence of their affair that would eventually destroy his reputation regardless of how they tried to manage the scandal. But more immediately dangerous was Aisha's reaction. He had expected rage, hysteria, immediate demands for divorce and public confrontation. Instead, she was being supportive of Ikra, talking about figuring things out, acting like a problem solver rather than a betrayed wife. That meant she was thinking clearly. That meant she would start asking questions about his behavior, his manipulation of her sister, his complete disregard for both their well-being. That meant she might start looking more closely at other aspects of their marriage, other moments when he had prioritized his own interests over her happiness. That meant she was dangerous. Standing in that darkened hallway, listening to his wife comfort the sister he had manipulated and impregnated, Karim made the decision that would transform him from an unfaithful husband into a cold-blooded killer. Both women had to disappear. The pregnancy had to disappear. The evidence of his betrayal had to disappear, and he had to find a way to make it look like he was the victim rather than the perpetrator. Fortunately, he had been planning real estate deals and construction projects for over 15 years. He was very good at solving complex logistical problems, and he was about to apply those same skills to murder. Don't go anywhere. We're about to reveal the chilling details of how Karim planned and executed one of the most calculated murders in recent memory, and how a single overlooked security camera would eventually expose every lie he told. Make sure you're subscribed because this case gets even more shocking from here. Over the next 24 hours, as Aisha and Ikra tried to process the emotional devastation of the affair's revelation, Karim was methodically planning the most important project of his criminal career, the perfect double murder. His first advantage was that neither woman suspected him of being capable of violence. To them, he was still the successful businessman, the respected community leader, the man who had built his empire through hard work and determination. The idea that he might respond to their crisis with murder rather than negotiation would have seemed absurd. His second advantage was his intimate knowledge of both women's psychology and daily routines. He knew that Aisha's first instinct would be to protect Iqra rather than punish her. He knew that Iqra would be grateful for her sister's forgiveness and would trust whatever solution Aisha proposed. He knew that both women would want to handle the situation privately, at least initially, giving him time to act before anyone outside the family became involved. His third advantage was the upcoming weekend, when fate would provide him with the perfect opportunity to commit murder without witnesses. Aisha's elderly aunt Malika, who lived in Dearborn Heights, had called Thursday morning to ask for help preparing for her grandson's wedding reception, which was scheduled for the following Monday. The preparation would require 3 full days of cooking, cleaning, and decorating, and Aunt Malika needed assistance from family members who were strong enough to move furniture and organize large quantities of food. Under normal circumstances, Aisha would have brought Iqra with her to help with the wedding preparations. But given the emotional crisis they were navigating, she decided it would be better for her sister to stay home and rest while she handled the family obligations alone. "I'll leave Friday morning and come back Sunday evening," she told Karim Thursday night, having no idea that she was providing him with the exact information he needed to plan her murder. "Iqra needs some quiet time to think about what she wants to do next, and I need some space to figure out how I'm going to handle everything." "That sounds reasonable," Karim replied, already calculating timelines and alibis. "Take all the time you need. I'll make sure Iqra has everything she needs while you're gone." Friday morning, Karim woke up early to prepare for what would be either the most successful day of his life or the day that would send him to prison forever. He helped Aisha pack her overnight bag, drove her to Aunt Malika's house, and spent 20 minutes being introduced to elderly relatives he had never met, establishing his presence in their memories as the devoted husband who was obviously devoted to his wife and her family. "Take care of my sister," Aisha whispered to him as they said goodbye on Aunt Malika's front porch. "Of course," he replied, kissing her cheek with what appeared to be genuine affection. "We'll see you Sunday night." It was the last conversation they would ever have. The murder plan Karim had developed was elegantly simple, which made it both easy to execute and difficult for investigators to unravel later. Step 1 was establishing an alibi that would place him away from the house during the time of Iqra's death. He drove directly from Aunt Malika's house to his office in downtown Dearborn, where he spent the morning meeting with contractors and reviewing property management reports. He made sure to have substantive conversations with his secretary, his accountant, and 2 different construction supervisors, creating multiple witnesses who could testify that he seemed completely normal and showed no signs of stress or unusual behavior. At noon, he left the office and drove to a restaurant across town, where he had lunch with Marcus Davidson, a potential investor in one of his commercial properties. The lunch meeting lasted over an hour and included detailed discussions about financing, development timelines, and market projections. Exactly the kind of business conversation that would be memorable and easily verified later. After lunch, he returned to his office for another 2 hours of meetings and phone calls, again ensuring that multiple people saw him acting normally and conducting routine business affairs. At 4 o'clock, he told his secretary he was going home early to spend the weekend with his sister-in-law, who was going through some personal difficulties that required family support. This created the impression that he was aware of Iqra's emotional state, but was planning to help her rather than harm her. The drive home took 25 minutes, which gave him until 4:30 p.m. to begin the final phase of his plan. Step 2 was ensuring that Iqra would be alone and vulnerable when he arrived. Throughout the day, he had been sending her text messages expressing concern about her well-being and asking how she was coping with the stress of everything that had happened. Her responses indicated that she was spending the day at home, trying to catch up on coursework and thinking about her future options. "I'm leaving the office early to check on you," he texted at 3:45. "We should talk about next steps and how to move forward in a way that protects everyone involved." Her response came immediately. "Thank you. I've been thinking about what Aisha said, and I want to do whatever causes the least pain for everyone. Perfect. She was still trusting, still believing that he wanted to find a solution that would work for all three of them. She had no idea that from his perspective, the only solution that worked was her death. Step 3 was the most crucial, creating physical evidence that would point to Aisha as the killer while eliminating any traces of his own involvement. Before leaving his office, Karim stopped at 3 different locations to purchase the items he would need. A pair of latex gloves from a medical supply store, paying cash and avoiding security cameras. A small bottle of chloroform from a chemical supply company where he had an established business relationship. A package of zip ties from a hardware store where he was a regular customer. None of these purchases would seem suspicious individually, and he was careful to spread them across different locations and time periods so that no single transaction would be memorable. When he arrived home at 4:30 p.m., Ikra was sitting in the living room with her laptop, working on her thesis project, just as she had indicated in her text messages. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her with what appeared to be genuine concern. "It's been a difficult day," she admitted. "I keep thinking about how much this is going to change everything for everyone." "Change doesn't have to be devastating," he replied. "Sometimes it's an opportunity to build something better than what existed before." They talked for nearly an hour about practical considerations, how to handle the pregnancy publicly, how to manage family reactions, how to minimize social and professional consequences for everyone involved. Karim was careful to seem supportive and optimistic, encouraging Ikra to believe that they could find a way forward that would work for all three of them. At 5:30, he suggested they take a walk around the neighborhood to continue their conversation in a more private setting. "I don't want to risk any neighbors overhearing us," he explained. "Some of these discussions are too personal to have where anyone might listen in." Ikra agreed, and they spent 45 minutes walking through the quiet residential streets around their house, discussing various scenarios for handling the pregnancy and the affair's aftermath. To any neighbors who might have seen them, they appeared to be having a calm, supportive conversation between family members, working through a difficult situation. What the neighbors couldn't see was that Karim was mentally rehearsing every detail of what he was planning to do when they returned to the empty house. At 6:15 p.m., they walked back through the front door of the Al-Hassan home for the last time together. "I think we're making real progress," Karim told Ikra as he locked the door behind them. "Why don't you sit down and I'll make us some tea? I want to talk through a few more possibilities for handling this situation." Ikra settled onto the living room sofa, relieved that Karim seemed to be taking such a reasonable approach to their crisis. After days of fearing his reaction to her refusal to end the pregnancy, she was grateful that he appeared to be accepting her decision and trying to find alternative solutions. She had no idea that she had just walked into the last conversation of her life. The murder itself took less than 10 minutes to complete, but Karim had spent hours planning every detail to ensure it would appear to be the result of a domestic dispute rather than a calculated execution. "Before we talk about long-term solutions," he said, as he handed Ikra a cup of tea, "I need to ask you something important. Are you absolutely certain that keeping this pregnancy is the right choice? Because once we start making public arrangements, once we tell our families and the community, there's no going back." "I'm certain," Ikra replied without hesitation. "I know it will be complicated and difficult, but I can't end a pregnancy just because it's inconvenient. Even if it means destroying Aisha's marriage, even if it means ruining both our reputations permanently. We'll find a way to minimize the damage," she said, with the confidence of a 22-year-old who still believed that good intentions could overcome practical realities. "People will be shocked initially, but eventually they'll understand that sometimes these things just happen." Karim nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her perspective seriously. "I admire your optimism," he said, "but I think you're underestimating how devastating this revelation will be for everyone involved." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some mistakes are too big to survive," he said quietly. "Some secrets are too damaging to become public. Some problems require permanent solutions." The change in his tone made Ikra look up from her teacup, with the first hint of genuine alarm she had felt since their conversation began. "Karim, "What are you saying?" Instead of answering directly, he stood up from his chair and moved to the window, ostensibly checking to make sure no neighbors were visible in their yards. In reality, he was verifying that the street was empty and that no one would witness what happened next. "I'm saying that I've spent 15 years building a reputation in this community," he said, his back still turned to her. "I've worked every day since I was 16 years old to create a life that my father would have been proud of. I've sacrificed everything, my youth, my freedom, my personal desires, to build something meaningful and lasting." "I understand that," Ikra replied, though she was beginning to feel genuinely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "That's why we need to find a way to handle this situation that doesn't destroy what you've built." Karim turned away from the window and looked at her directly for the first time since they had returned from their walk. The expression on his face was completely different from anything she had seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly without the warmth or affection that had characterized their relationship for the past 2 months. "There is no way to handle this situation," he said calmly. "There are only ways to eliminate it." Before Ikra could process what he meant or respond to the threat implicit in his words, Karim moved across the living room with swift efficiency. The chloroform-soaked cloth was pressed against her face before she could scream, the chemical smell overwhelming her senses and making her thoughts fuzzy and uncoordinated. She struggled against him, clawing at his arms and trying to pull the cloth away from her nose and mouth. But the chloroform was already taking effect. Her movements became sluggish and uncoordinated, her vision began to blur, and her ability to think clearly disappeared within seconds. The last thing she was aware of was Karim's voice, speaking to her with the same gentle tone he had used throughout their affair. "I'm sorry, Ikra, but some problems require permanent solutions." When she regained consciousness 20 minutes later, she was lying on the living room floor with her hands zip-tied behind her back. Karim was sitting in the chair above her, calmly adjusting his appearance and checking his watch. "You're awake," he observed. "Good. I need you conscious for the next part." "Karim, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the chemical exposure. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, we can find another way." "There is no other way," he interrupted. "You made that impossible when you refused to end the pregnancy. You made it worse when you confessed everything to Aisha. And you sealed both your fates when you started talking about keeping the baby and building a future together." He stood up from the chair and walked to the fireplace mantel, where he picked up one of Aisha's silk scarves, a beautiful blue and gold piece she had bought during their last trip to Morocco. "The tragic story," he continued conversationally, "is going to be that Aisha returned home early from helping her aunt, discovered you alone in the house, and confronted you about the affair she suspected. The confrontation became heated. You told her about the pregnancy. She became enraged and attacked you in a jealous fury." "No one will believe that," Ikra said desperately. "Aisha would never hurt anyone. She loves me." "Love can become hatred very quickly when it's mixed with betrayal," Karim replied. "Everyone knows how much Aisha wanted children, how devastated she's been by her inability to get pregnant. Learning that her sister was carrying her husband's child would be exactly the kind of emotional shock that could drive someone to violence." He knelt down beside her, the scarf stretched between his hands. "The evidence will support the story perfectly," he continued. "Aisha's scarf as the murder weapon, her fingerprints on it from normal use, her presence in the house. She'll be back Sunday evening, just in time to discover your body, her clear motive for jealous rage, the text messages I'm going to send from your phone making it look like you two had a fight." "Text messages? Oh yes, very convincing ones. Messages that will make it appear you were taunting her about the pregnancy, telling her that her husband preferred you, threatening to take him away from her permanently. The kind of cruel messages that would justify her violent response in the minds of a jury." Ikra tried to speak again, tried to plead with him, or reason with him, or find some argument that might change his mind. But Karim was no longer listening to her words. His attention was focused entirely on the mechanical details of committing the perfect murder. "I want you to know," he said as he positioned the scarf around her neck, "that this isn't personal. In another situation, under different circumstances, I might have genuinely cared about you. You're intelligent, beautiful, and you have a kind heart. But you became a threat to everything I've worked to build, and I don't allow threats to continue existing." The strangulation was slow and methodical. Karim had researched the process carefully, learning about the pressure points and techniques that would be most efficient, while also creating the kind of evidence pattern that would support his staged crime scene. Ikra's final moments were spent not in hatred for the man who was killing her, but in heartbroken grief for her sister, who would return home to find her dead and would spend the rest of her life being blamed for a murder she didn't commit. By 7:30 p.m., Ikra Benjeloun was dead, and Karim Al-Hassan was carefully arranging the evidence that would frame his wife for the crime. The hardest part of his plan was over. Now came the delicate work of creating a narrative that would convince police, prosecutors, and a jury that Aisha had committed murder in a fit of jealous rage. He had 40 hours before she returned home to discover the body. 40 hours to perfect every detail of the frame job that would send an innocent woman to prison for life, while allowing him to continue living as the grieving widower who had lost both his wife and his sister-in-law to a tragic family dispute. But as we'll see in the next part of our investigation, Karim's plan had one fatal flaw that he never anticipated: the existence of a security camera he didn't know about, operated by a neighbor he had never met, recording everything that happened on Maple Street during the crucial hours when he claimed to be innocent of any wrongdoing. Stay with us as we reveal how advanced technology and old-fashioned detective work combined to expose one of the most elaborate frame jobs in criminal history. And if you want to make sure you never miss stories like this one, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Karim's hands trembled as he surveyed the scene before him. Ikra's lifeless body lay crumpled on the bedroom floor, the silk scarf still wrapped around her neck. But this was only the beginning of his calculated deception. Moving with mechanical precision, he retrieved Aisha's leather gloves from their shared dresser. These gloves, a gift from their honeymoon in Paris, would now become instruments of betrayal. He pressed them against various surfaces throughout the room, creating fingerprints that would tell a story of jealous rage. The perfume bottle came next. Aisha's signature Chanel No. 5, the scent she wore on their wedding day, now found its way to the nightstand beside Ikra's body. Karim crushed the bottle slightly, spilling its contents across the marble surface to suggest a struggle had taken place. But Karim's most brilliant manipulation involved Ikra's phone. Using the device's scheduling feature, he composed a series of messages that would paint Aisha as an unhinged, jealous wife. The first message, time-stamped for 9:47 p.m. the previous evening, read, "You disgust me. How could you betray me like this with my own husband?" A second message, scheduled for 10:15 p.m., was even more damning. "I trusted you, Ikra. I raised you. And this is how you repay me, by carrying his child." The final message, set to send at 11:30 p.m., contained the words that would seal Aisha's fate. "I can't let you destroy our family. I won't let you." Karim had learned about message scheduling during his affair with Ikra. She had used it to send him sweet good morning texts while pretending to sleep beside her sister. Now this innocent feature would become the foundation of his elaborate frame. At exactly 7:23 a.m., Karim placed the call that would change everything. His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine despair as he spoke to the 911 operator. "My sister-in-law. She's not moving. There's blood. Oh God, I think she's dead." The first responders arrived within minutes to find Karim pacing frantically in the driveway. His eyes were red, his hands shaking as he led them to the bedroom where Ikra lay motionless. Detective Sarah Morrison, a seasoned investigator with the Dearborn Police Department, took one look at the scene and immediately recognized the telltale signs of domestic violence. The scarf, clearly belonging to a woman, the gloves bearing Aisha's fingerprints, and the shattered perfume bottle all pointed to one conclusion. When Morrison asked about Aisha's whereabouts, Karim's performance reached its peak. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. She's been so angry lately. Ever since she found out about what Ikra and I never thought she would." The detective found the phone messages within hours. The progression from anger to threat to implied violence painted a clear picture of premeditation. In Morrison's 15 years on the force, she had seen countless domestic disputes escalate to murder, but rarely with such clear digital evidence. When Aisha returned from her mother's house at 3:47 p.m., she was met by a wall of police cars and crime scene tape. Her sister's body was being loaded into a coroner's van as neighbors watched from their doorsteps, whispers spreading like wildfire through the close-knit community. If you're finding this case as shocking as we are, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations. Your support helps us bring you these detailed stories. Karim played his role perfectly. As Aisha was read her rights, he reached for her hand, tears streaming down his face. "Aisha, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't—" His words would later be cited by prosecutors as evidence of his genuine shock and grief. The arrest made local headlines within hours. "Prominent Dearborn woman charged in sister's murder," read the banner across the Detroit Free Press website. Social media exploded with commentary from community members who knew the family, many expressing disbelief that gentle Aisha could be capable of such violence. But beneath the public performance, Karim felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't expected: guilt. Not for murdering Ikra, but for the possibility that his plan might not work. What if Aisha somehow proved her innocence? What if investigators dug too deep? Detective Morrison prided herself on thorough investigations, but the evidence against Aisha seemed overwhelming. The motive was clear: a wife discovering her husband's affair with her own sister, made worse by an unplanned pregnancy. The means were obvious. Aisha's personal belongings were used as weapons and planted throughout the crime scene. The opportunity was perfect. Aisha had returned home alone, with hours to commit the crime before Karim's morning discovery. Yet something nagged at Morrison as she reviewed the case files. The phone messages seemed almost too convenient, too perfectly timed to build a case for premeditation. In her experience, crimes of passion rarely involved such calculated communication. Her partner, Detective James Rivera, disagreed. "Sarah, sometimes the obvious answer is the right answer. This woman found out her husband was cheating with her sister, and she snapped. It happens more than we'd like to admit." But Morrison couldn't shake her unease. She decided to dig deeper into the digital evidence, requesting a full forensic analysis of both Ikra's and Karim's devices. 3 weeks into the investigation, digital forensics expert Marcus Chen made a discovery that would change everything. While analyzing Ikra's phone, he noticed an unusual pattern in the message timestamps. "Detective Morrison, you need to see this," Chen called from his laboratory. "These threatening messages to Ikra, they weren't sent in real time. They were scheduled using the phone's timer function." Morrison leaned over Chen's shoulder as he pulled up the technical data. "See this metadata? The messages were composed at 11:52 p.m. on March 14th, but scheduled to appear as if they were sent throughout the previous evening. Someone wanted to create the illusion of an escalating argument." The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. If the messages were fake, then the entire timeline of the crime was fabricated, but who would have had access to Ikra's phone after her death? Chen's next discovery provided the answer. Security camera footage from a neighbor's property, initially dismissed as too distant and grainy, revealed something crucial when enhanced through digital reconstruction. The timestamp showed Aisha's car leaving the driveway at 6:15 p.m. on March 14th, heading toward her mother's house. More importantly, the footage showed Karim's Mercedes returning to the property at 8:30 p.m., after which no vehicles left the premises until morning. If Aisha had truly returned to commit murder, her car would have been captured on camera. Before we reveal how this case ultimately concluded, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have notifications turned on. Cases like this require months of investigation, and we want to make sure you don't miss the final shocking revelations. The pieces of Karim's deception were finally beginning to crumble. When Detective Morrison and her team arrived at Karim's office on April 8th, he was in the middle of a board meeting with potential investors. His assistant tried to stop the officers, but Morrison's warrant gave her the authority she needed. "Mr. Al-Hassan, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding your sister-in-law's murder." Karim's face went pale, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, Detective. I'll do anything to help find justice for Ikra." In the interrogation room, Morrison laid out the evidence methodically. The scheduled messages, the security footage, the impossibility of Aisha's timeline. With each revelation, Karim's confident demeanor cracked a little more. "The camera across the street shows your wife leaving at 6:15 p.m., Mr. Al-Hassan, but it also shows you returning at 8:30 p.m. and never leaving again until morning. How do you explain that?" Karim's hands began to shake. I must have forgotten. The trauma of finding Ikra, it's affected my memory." But Morrison pressed harder. "We also found something interesting in your phone records. Deleted messages between you and Ikra, including discussions about a pregnancy termination at a clinic in Ohio. Care to explain those?" The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Karim's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, and there was no escape. Karim Al-Hassan was arrested on April 8, 2023, and charged with first-degree murder, evidence tampering and perjury. His bail was set at $2 million, which he could not make after his assets were frozen pending investigation. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became one of the most watched criminal proceedings in Michigan's recent history. Prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez systematically dismantled Karim's deception, showing the jury how a man obsessed with reputation and control had murdered his pregnant lover to protect his image. The defense argued that Karim was being framed by police desperate to solve a high-profile case, but the evidence was overwhelming. The scheduled messages, security footage, and digital trail of the affair painted a picture of calculated murder. On September 22, 2023, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Karim to life in prison without the possibility of parole, saying, "Mr. Al-Hassan, you betrayed every person who trusted you. You manipulated, deceived, and murdered an innocent young woman carrying your child. Then you attempted to destroy your wife's life to cover your crimes. This court can conceive of no more heinous betrayal." Aisha, who had spent 8 months in jail awaiting trial, was finally free. But her ordeal had cost her everything: her sister, her marriage, her standing in the community, and her faith in the justice system. Today, Aisha lives quietly in another state under a different name, working as a counselor for domestic violence survivors. Karim remains in maximum security prison, where he will spend the rest of his life paying for his ultimate betrayal. The house where Ikra died was eventually demolished, replaced by a small memorial garden where community members still leave flowers for a young woman whose life was cut short by the very people she trusted most. This case reminds us that evil often hides behind the mask of respectability, and that the greatest betrayals come from those closest to us. In a world where appearances can be deceiving, the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. The Karim Al-Hassan case reminds us that evil often wears a mask of respectability. If this story has impacted you, please share it with others who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth investigations that expose the truth behind shocking crimes. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest cases. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, the resources in our description could save a life. Remember, you are not alone, and help is available. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay safe, and never stop seeking the truth.